Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's still morning for a little while. I think actually probably most people will be watching this in the afternoon, so I might as well just say good afternoon as well, since like we never do the thing where we should like tweet about the fact that we're going to be doing a live stream ever, so that people like know to show up for that thing. We don't do that. We knew ahead of time that we were doing it. We just didn't let any of you guys know, because why would we do that?
We knew that it was going to be today. We didn't know when today.
That's fair, and that does make it difficult. We should get better at scheduling things.
That's the story of my life.
At literally any point on Thursday, at any point, you need to be ready to join us for a live stream. You're not allowed to leave
To be fair,
your phone or your computer.
When we planned this discussion, it was going to be yesterday, but then you had D&D, and I got the stomach flu yesterday, so I spent the entire day yesterday on the floor of my bathroom.
Yeah. And I mean, D&D is obviously way more important. Speaking of, if folks are interested in listening to the D&D campaign that I am running, it's going to be posted online in the near future. I'm hoping to post it as an audio podcast, but it will also be posted to the Dungeon of Bad Decisions YouTube channel, if I'm not wrong. So I'll link that below if people are interested in listening to me tell a crazy murder mystery story set in a fantasy world and make all my friends run around and spook them real bad. Except Gretchen. Not Gretchen. She doesn't get any spooks.
Because Gretchen doesn't D&D.
Yeah. Anyway, today we wanted to do a very not funny and not jokey discussion, because we're us and like we're very serious YouTubers. Very serious.
This is my very serious face.
We in our book club, which y'all should know by now, are just wrapping up. Next week will be the last episode in a cycle where we all picked own voices stories. So I figured it would be a good time for us to sort of do another touch base with where sort of representation is in the publishing industry, which by all accounts and measures is probably still not the best. But we wanted to sort of look at like how we feel about certain things and discussions that are still going on and are actively going on, which is good. Having these discussions maintained and going on means that hopefully change comes from them, or at least more acceptance. And the more that we talk about it in the public, it means that the public might change the publishers' minds by voting with their money, essentially. Do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I think just, as someone who's worked at Barnes & Noble for a year, every display at Barnes & Noble is paid for by a publisher, right? So the things that go on step ladders, the things that go on end caps, that isn't Barnes & Noble just willy-nilly saying, I'm going to pick this book. It's a publisher choosing to back a certain book, a certain title. And I think really, especially since The Hate U Give came out last year and really made such a big splash, I think I've now seen, certainly not as many, but more books written by people of color or minority groups on those particular displays. And I could just think of, we just had, the step ladder was the new special edition of The Hate U Give, and it transitioned almost over immediately to Children of Blood and Bone by Toni Odiemi. I can't remember exactly what her last name is. I can see it, but I can't. I can see the cover, but I can't remember her last name entirely. And that's another African American author, African American story, more fantasy sci-fi, but that's also very good to have out there. I will say though that I think in terms of publishers, that there might be this thing now where they are doing more with African American characters because it is easier to promote, even just via the book cover, right? That this is written by someone of color, is written by a minority character. And I just hope that they don't lean on that as a crutch. Like, you know what I mean? Because you can't
changing it from representation to like tokenism of like it not being great, of just being like, because this is a book by a token Black person or a token Black book, so it fills a quota type thing? Or are you talking like?
Well, no. So like, you know, so right now it's all like, you know, we need diverse books and all of that. Like that's for all minorities,
Okay,
all people of color.
right.
But like, how do you promote? And I'm saying it very from like a very sad capitalist point of view, right? Because that's like I've done so much research into how publishers pick and the books that they're going to put their money behind, and like already before the We Need Diverse Books movement, like the way that they were co-opting, you know, people's online movements, it's very creepy. And I could talk about that for days, but like, so right, it's easier to say like this is a book written by an African American author with an African American character if you can put an African American face on the front cover, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because that's the point.
You know what that's saying.
But unless, you know, you go the David Levithan route and you do two boys kissing and there are two boys kissing on the cover, you know, how do you know what I mean? Like a book by a queer author about queer characters
is harder to,
right? Like,
I mean, I don't know that necessarily is the same, because like at least in YA there's actually not equivalent but a significant chunk of queer books. There's things like Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secret of the Universe, and the book that's getting a lot of buzz right now, Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, because Love, Simon came out in the theaters, and I'm hearing a lot of good things about that film and what it's doing and what it says. And I also think that it's great that that's in theaters at the same time as A Wrinkle in Time is, which has a biracial character, and a lot of high profile African American actors and what's her face?
Who?
Comedian
Mindy Kaling?
Yes, Mindy Kaling is in it as well, who's also a high-profile minority actor. That's also an underrated minority in our country. So there's this sort of thing in like popular media of like visual media of moving towards more representation, which I'm super into. And like I was just telling you, I just watched a Western, which was like very high on the representation point. And Westerns are not super known for that. They're in fact known quite the opposite. But like that, having that be more of a thing just in general, I don't think it necessarily needs to be a selling point of the book. I think that the point is that it's just also a thing that happens. And
I guess that I just don't believe that right now that's a place where publishing is. Like it will always be a for-profit business, and right now books by diverse authors are becoming a more that's what there was their excuse prior to this, was that, well, books about diverse characters by diverse people, like they don't sell, which is baloney to a certain extent. But that was the line, right? Was that well, they don't sell. And now
the idea being that anybody can read about a white person, but only Black people want to read about Black people.
Yeah. So I just like, especially with like just how much I found out with every more layer of my research as well about how deep and how like weird this goes. It's just, I guess that I just don't believe until we see like in the next 10 years this kind of thing being a thing from major publishers as well, right? Because there are plenty of smaller publishers who have been on this bandwagon for some time, and then they didn't need, you know, a online Twitter hashtag to say, oh, maybe we should change how we do things. But like, you know, your major publisher, since most publishing houses are like, there's 5 major publishers in the world, basically. So like, I don't know, maybe it's my cynicism, but like, I just, until I can see this behavior continuing past like
the equitable phase of, or like the initial rabble rousingness. I guess the thing is that currently a lot of, and consistently, it wasn't just like one little spark, but like for like the last 10 years or so, people have like slowly become more and more angry about representation, and it's become more and more of a thing. And I mean, I was watching some clips of like old cartoons that we used to watch when we were younger in the early 2000s and late 90s, and there was a lot of representation in cartoons, even though it leaned more towards that tokenism type thing where it's just like, ah, yes, there's the black character who doesn't really, it's not really saying anything about being African American, they're just there. But looking at cartoons nowadays with the 2.5-year-old that I have on at my house on weekends, it's like not at all the same. As it's as if we've regressed from where we were, which was not a great place to begin with. It was a better place, but it was not like a great place. Like if you look at the sitcoms of the 90s, there were two really big sitcoms that boasted African American families, and like I don't think that you can say the same for today, or at least if
I guess.
Like what like what has happened here.
I guess that's just what I mean, is that like, just because right now, you know, we have a couple of things, and I just remember that like when Wonder Woman came out, for example, people were like,
Black
okay,
Panther too now being like a recurring thing of that.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Like, so with Wonder Woman, someone literally had said like, okay, well, you women got one. Can you calm down now? And I'm like, no, it's not about having one. You know what I mean? And the same thing when like they were like, oh, okay, you have a female Jedi now. Like, you got one. Calm down. And it's like, no, one isn't the point. Equity is the point. And that's like, you know, hopefully the particular success of Wonder Woman, and then especially Black Panther, which has blown the socks off of box office records. Like, you know, we just have to keep that going and stay. And I would say stay angry at like, you know, okay, so now we have Black Panther, so now what next? We have Wonder Woman, so now what next? And like, I don't know. I think I remember just this one thing about like the differences in costuming the Amazons from Wonder Woman, which was a female-directed movie and costume-designed movie, to the Justice League and how they're portrayed. And all of a sudden, because it went from different director and a different costumer, the like actual female armor of the Amazons from the Wonder Woman movie became like the like bikini armor that you see.
They did, like, they did that. Oh no!
Yeah, they did that. They did that. So but just
visual canon. Like, why would you? What?
I don't know. Go ask them.
Okay.
But yeah, no, it's just like, huh? So I mean, just dumb things like that, you know. That I trust no one. I trust no one.
One of the cartoons that I really liked that had just started to come out and got canceled right away, that has to do with this sort of ideas. So there was we grew up with Teen Titans, right? And now Teen Titans have come back as Teen Titans Go, which a lot of people really hate because it changes the tone of the show like a lot, but it's still a form of that, and it gets people talking, and maybe kids nowadays will go back and watch the old Teen Titans. But in the same vein as what Teen Titans used to be, they had a show called Young Justice.
I'm so mad at you for getting me into that. So mad at you.
It is a brilliantly written show, and the like people who were making it and the publisher literally said the reason that they canceled it was because it was more popular with girls. And that shouldn't happen in like it shouldn't have happened in like 2015 or whenever it happened, and still should not happen today, where they made a superhero show and their idea is that this is aimed at boys, but girls like it, so it's failed.
So for those of you who don't know, Young Justice only got like 2 seasons, and Michaela got me into it before I really realized there was only 2 seasons, and then I started watching it, and then the second season ripped my heart out, and I hate you.
To be fair, I watched it while it was still running, so like it hadn't gotten canceled yet. That's not my fault. You can petition Cartoon Network. I don't know. But like this thing where like there's this inherent, that's in the TV industry and the movie industry, but there's still this inherent prejudice and this view on marketing, which is a major issue, causing problems with representation and causing problems with equality and equity. Because in marketing, you're supposed to aim at a particular group, and the way that you do that is by looking like creating things that are very dimorphic. It creates dimorphism in the thing of saying superheroes are for boys. And like as much as many women who come out like myself and are like, no, I've been reading Batman since I was a little kid, and like I've always liked superheroes. This isn't like you didn't give me the female superhero just because you made a Wonder Woman movie. Like there's women who've liked all superheroes, including the male superheroes, and but marketing says that because this is aimed at men, that there's certain things we should do to then push women out of it. And if women like it, then it's failed. They failed their marketing. And that's like the craziest shit that I've heard ever.
Like, I mean, aren't they still buying the merchandise? Does your gender matter when you're buying the merchandise? Yeah. Isn't that the point? Like, it's just because it comes from my hand, it's still a green bill.
Yeah.
Like,
no, I don't know. It's weird, and that same thing I think happens in the publishing industry where they're worrying about their marketing, like you said, of like, okay, so diversity is important to people right now. We can publish diverse books, but we need to make it super clear that it's you know about this. And The Hate U Give is great, but it's filling a niche. It's very specific. It's not just a Black book written by a Black author. It's a Black book written by a Black author about Black Lives Matter, which is very poignant and what people want to hear about and want to, like, it's very specific. It's whereas the one that you talked about that showed up after it, that's more interesting to me because that's not necessarily about race, right? Like it takes a sidestep away from the obvious. It is. I
haven't read it yet, so
yeah. So I don't know. It might have stuff about race.
I actually have the arc somewhere here, but
I'd be interested to hear what sort of the content of that guy is, because it would maybe it would maybe show a better trend, especially in sci-fi and fantasy, and adult sci-fi and fantasy. They're actually some of the biggest awards in the last couple of years have gone to African American female writers, which people were outraged about the fact that they were female to begin with. Like, how dare women write sci-fi and fantasy, but also like an African American story in sci-fi and fantasy is even more unheard of. And this trend of them being not just like being published, but winning awards might help open the door for more authors to write stories who may have been turned down not because their story was a specific niche, like I'm talking about racism. They might have been turned down just because they are African American, and they're like, no, like the people reading these books are white men, and therefore we will only let white men tell stories because the white men know the stories to tell to white men.
And I mean, I'm just like, and the reason I never like reading adult fantasy and never have is that every single book, I swear to God, is just a riff on Tolkien, right? It's that medieval English-based fantasy, and that's what all of it is. And so, like, just this introduction of, like, people with different backgrounds who are like, I'd like to riff on something other than Tolkien is amazing, because I love fantasy, but I've read that story a million times. So you have, like, Nnedi Okorafor doing, like, Afrofuturism, I believe is the title, and that was fantastic. And just because, like, you know, even just things like the Grisha series by Leigh Bardugo is based on Russian mythology. Yeah. And I was just like, it's I don't get me wrong, I love my knights and my castles and my that kind of thing. Like, I love that. I grew up on that. It's like what I was built on. But I'm sick of it. Yeah. And that is it's a one note thing, and I feel like, you know, we need to get other voices into this genre just so that it's not all the same all the time.
Yeah.
Just from a straight up, like, story baseline.
Yeah, it's not
like
interesting. Not interesting to read.
Yeah, I've now read, you know, Lord of the Rings 72 bajillion times from different people. I can read something else now. That would be really great.
Yeah.
That's why I really love Ellen O is a Asian American author who does some really great fantasy stuff and was actually one of the founding members of We Need Diverse Books, I believe. Mm-hmm. But still, her books have not gotten a lot of hype, and I feel like that's sad, because she writes really good stuff, guys. Good stuff.
Yeah, you should pick one for book club at some point if there's like a new one coming out at some point.
I know Julie Kagawa has a new book coming out.
Yeah. I'm always down to read Asian stuff. We all know that. Yeah, so the other thing I was going to sort of talk about was I listened to an interview that Patrick Rothfuss did when we were talking about how both of us have issues reading at least high fantasy for sure. Not the best. I've been reading more fantasy as of late because there's more interesting authors. I read one by a Latina female author, which was super interesting, and I really did like Patrick Rothfuss's book. And he sold the rights to some of his stuff to do a TV series, and they're currently working on a mini series that's sort of like a prequel to certain aspects of the books. I think it takes place, or it's surrounding Kvo's parents. So it's not the story of the books, it's a story in the world, which I enjoy. I'm glad about that. But he was also saying that he was really worried selling the rights to his stories that they would take his female characters and combine them, because that's a super common thing that they do, especially with like a big chunky fantasy book. They can't make like a movie or even a TV series out of that and have it do like the exact amount of justice. And one of the ways that they do that is by paring down characters, because it gets too visually difficult to tell them apart. And the characters that happens to the most, female characters. So the sassy best friend or partner becomes also the love interest. And when those were two separate characters to begin with. And he was like, no, because those characters can no longer do justice to those roles because they are not just that role anymore. It undermines everything. So there are people who are like in these industries who are, Patrick Rothfuss is a white guy, and he is very much definitely based in the Tolkien roots. Like his story, you can see aspects of it there. That's sort of how his fantasy world works. It's very new and very different, and his writing is very different. But it's you can still see that he's influenced there. But he's also cognizant of the issues, and I think that's also important. Is that writers and publishers who are looking at this and saying, okay, people have issues with this. If you are trying to change things, need to not just be like, okay, so just publish as many African American authors as we can. You also need to look at the people who you're currently having published and the white people coming to you and saying, no, you also need to do better at what you're doing, so that even in the stuff that we would traditionally publish, that also has better representation and better just betterness everywhere.
And make sure you're getting the right beta readers. This is going to drive me crazy. So I think we've talked about, I'm reading too many books right now, and like I've read, it's like the 22nd of March, and I've read 62 books already this year. And so I was just reading a book, and it's going to drive me crazy. It's a couple weeks ago now, which means it was like 20 books ago. But it was this book that had really wacky representation, and I was just thinking, just get a beta reader. Yeah. If you know, especially if you know that you're trying to write like a queer romance, or because obviously like don't appropriate, but also like just because you're a white straight person doesn't mean that all of your characters should be straight and white, because that's its own separate side issue. But just do your research and get beta readers. And because I was reading this book and I was like, me as someone who has studied this knows that this is wackadoodle. So like where along the line, if you knew that you were trying to do this, just get a beta reader or two of like,
maybe if you're not comfortable with these people as a beta reader, because a lot of people are like, well, who is this person and why would they do that? Just use them as a consultant and do research. If you're, and like research is not new to writers, like going and saying, I can't write queer romance because I'm not queer and I don't know what that is. If you're setting your book in a medieval time, you don't know what medieval times is. You don't live that life either, but you're going to write about it because you can do research on it. You can do research on what it's like to be queer. You can email people and just talk to them about what they think that a good representation is, and then use that in what you're doing. Reading is the only form of media that grows empathy. You should be able to put yourself in the place of another person. If you are writing, you should be able to put yourself in the place of another person pretty dang easily. And that includes gender, it includes sexuality, it includes race, it includes ethnicity and culture. It should not be super difficult for you to do that. And if it is, that might be something that you need to look at yourself at and be like, okay, so where can I find commonalities? Because we are all human. And that doesn't mean looking at the tropes and writing a stereotypical thing. It means being like, okay, so I can't write a flamboyant queer character. It makes me feel uncomfortable. Don't write a flamboyant queer character because you're not going to do it justice. Try and find some other way to add that representation in. It doesn't need to be cut and dry, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I also think just that like understanding stereotypes
Yeah.
is like make sure you know all of them before you go to write someone, because you can be like, okay, well, I don't have like the flamboyant queer character, like I'm not going to touch that stereotype, but there are so many other stereotypes.
Yeah.
Or so many other like harmful ways to represent that you should be aware of all of them before you go. And it's like it's so easy now because we're talking about this so much more to literally just type into Google stereotypes of X, minority group, and like there are people who've done so much research on this and so much, like it's literally one Google search away. I bet you like the first result.
Somebody talking about, there's a blog post somewhere where somebody was like,
there.
here are all the movies and TV shows and books that have done it. Don't do it. If you want a good thing that comes out of that, though, so I have been doing a couple videos and I've been talking about it a lot. The Adventure Zone podcast that's done by the McElroy brothers. It's, hosted by 4 white dudes. And they decided that when they were doing their fantasy campaign, they were going to have inclusion. And one of the first ways they did that was that they had a lesbian couple in it. The thing that happened, though, is that at the end of that arc, the lesbian couple died. And that's a super huge thing in queer media where, like, they're there and then they die. And, like, that's a problem. And the McElroys didn't know when they added that in because they hadn't done that little extra step of just saying, okay, so we want to add in queer characters. What shouldn't we do? And they ended up correcting for it and doing a really good job and sort of affecting the way that their story went and adding more representation. And as they've moved forward, they've done more research. I've listened to them say things like, I wanted to be an Inuit character. So I emailed some folks who are actually Inuit and asked, like, what sort of things would be part of that character and, like, what would they care about? And that's literally all you need to do is send an email. Find somebody online, whether it's a person who wrote a blog about it, because they're going to be super excited that you're asking them questions. They want to be represented correctly. Like, nobody's going to be like, I'm not going to answer your questions. White dude, how dare you?
I mean, if they are, that's also their right.
I mean, they can say no. Don't harass people.
Because like it's not other people's jobs to educate you per se.
No, so but if you come from a place of saying, I want to add representation, I would like to do it correctly, most people are going to be super excited about that. They want that too. It's a similar goal.
Also, I feel like if you can find their email for that purpose, they're probably open to it. But like,
yeah,
don't walk up to random people on the street, y'all. Don't do that.
Hey, I see that you are black. I am not. Please tell me, what is that like? Don't do that. It's not good. But like, there's ways to do it tactfully. You need to be aware of that. The world is super open to you nowadays in order to do that. You don't have to like move anywhere. You don't even have to call anybody on the phone. You can send them a very pleasant email, which they have the choice to respond to or not. And it's not aggressive and it's not going to affect their lives much more than that. So yes, that's a thing that needs to happen. And it's still being worked on and it's doing better. It sounds like nowadays they're making steps towards a better world, but we're not there yet. And we need to keep on that and keep on the people in charge and do what needs to be done in that sense of saying, like, I'm going to buy more books that are by queer authors or by other races or by whatever else, to let publishers know that no, people are buying it. We're voting with our money. We're saying this is what we want. Give us more of that.
I will literally buy any fantasy book at this point that is not just Tolkien again. Anything.
Please. Yeah, so if you like representation and stuff, our channel is definitely a good place to be, because it's something that we talk about a lot and also make an effort to do. Reading translated fiction, reading interesting, and not just because that's something that we focus on. It's also because we find that more interesting as readers. Like, as consumers, we want that. So we're gonna be talking about it regardless, even if we didn't care about it, because that's just what we gravitate to. We're like, oh, this is a thing that I like, but it's also different from the things that I like. Cool, I would like that.
I feel like maybe half of our problem is that we talk about a lot of obscure stuff.
And nobody finds us because they're like, what the heck is this?
5 people have also read this book and they're like, huh? Unless you're me, because sometimes I'm just like, this is the new fancy YA thing we should all read. And Taylor and Michaela are like,
no.
Okay.
Cool. I don't care as much.
It's fine, I care.
No, it's fine. You do care, and that's also your prerogative. You're allowed to do that. There's things that I read that are very like mass consumable things. I read urban fantasy books, which are pretty mass consumable. It's okay. We all have that thing. I think that we've been going for about half an hour, so I think that now's a good time to stop. If you have anything to add to the discussion about any of the points that we talked about today, whether it be on voices or just better representation in general, or publishing and like the way that the system works, I guess, marketing affecting what comes out, and how people deal with that, please leave stuff in the comments. It's just a discussion video, so we would like to discuss with you folks, even though we never tell you when this is happening. We do want other people to join in. We promise.
If you have book recommendations, we will always take those. I probably won't be able to read something for fun until 2019, but please do drop that down there.
If you want. I always enjoy hearing about new and interesting things and looking into it and picking it up and giving things a try. So yeah, also stop by next week. We're going to be talking about Being Fishkill, which is actually, do you have your copy?
I do. It's right here. It's a little bit later because it's like bound for a library.
Yeah. I hear that she's actually a local author, that she lives in Western Massachusetts, so that's interesting. I think she lives out here somewhere, so that might be.
No, she does.
It might be possible that you and I could reach out to her and be like, hey, do you want to talk about this thing on our YouTube channel that is very popular, because we're very serious YouTubers. Don't look it up. But that's entirely possible, because that's also a Known Voices book. Our next cycle is sort of a cycle of free picks where we get to pick whatever we want, and then after that we're going to be looking at independent publishers, which is also a super niche market. We're doing some niche looks at things, which I think makes our reading more interesting as well. Yeah, so leave things in the comments below. Let people know. That's happening next week on Wednesday. Hopefully in the evening, but you don't know.
Not my fault this time. I'm off that day and I finished the book.
It should be. I mean, Taylor and I are both always free Wednesday nights, so it shouldn't cause any issues. That should be what's happening next Wednesday. Yeah. Let us know how you are too. If you're having a good day, just say, hey, I enjoyed the video. I'm having a good day. I hope you are too. You could always say that too. You don't have to add to the discussion if you don't have anything to add. Say hi. Hi. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye.